In the endless ledger of the Astra Militarum, there are regiments with names that inspire awe, reverence, or dread. Some are remembered for heroism, others for numbers. The 88th Carnadon is remembered for none of those things. Officially, they are forgotten, purged from archives, redacted from deployment logs, erased from planetary histories. Yet their footprints remain, burned into stone, etched into bone, spoken of only in the quiet terror of the lower ranks. They are not heroes. They are not even men. They are the ones the Imperium sends when it no longer cares who lives. The first record we have of the 88th Carnadon comes from a fragmentary Vox transmission on Halox 5. A city hive was under siege from mutant heretics. The local planetary defense forces had collapsed. The PDF's command center transmitted desperate pleas for reinforcements, which went unanswered. For 3 weeks, their outer hives fell one by one, like teeth rotting inward. On the 4th week, a new signal crackled through the Vox. "We are deployed. Hold nothing. Leave no one." The voice was dry, toneless. No identification tag, no regiment code. The coordinates were exact. Then the signal ended. Hours later, the city shield flickered and failed. The enemies expected an orbital bombardment. Instead, grey uniformed troopers marched through the ash. No banners, no insignia, save for a black number on one shoulder, 88. They did not halt. They did not call for support. They advanced in a perfect phalanx, 40 by 40, each man exactly 1 meter apart from the next. The mutants opened fire. The 88th did not take cover. They did not shout orders. They walked forward. 1 man fell, then 2, then 9. The rest kept walking. The fallen were not retrieved. The 88 did not retreat. They never do. Within 48 hours, the entire city block was depopulated, not just of mutants, but of all life, civilians, defectors, medici workers, all gone. When the Adeptus Arbites arrived a week later to assess the ruins, they found mass burn pits filled with unidentifiable remains. A single phrase was carved into the wall of the central cathedral in scorched metal. No mercy, no fear. That was the first time the Imperium realized the 88th had returned. But who were they? The official record of Carnodan II, the regiment's claimed homeworld, shows a world under permanent volcanic lockdown. Atmospheric conditions render orbital surveillance useless. Storms arc with rad lightning. Life expectancy is measured in weeks outside the fortress ash cities. It is said that on Carnadon II, infants are tested for pain response at birth. If they scream, they are drowned. If they do not, they are taken. The children selected for the 88th are never named. They are assigned numbers and drilled from the moment they can walk. Their barracks are underground, without light. Discipline is enforced by sound collars that activate at the sound of crying. Infractions are punished with a 24-hour burial in volcanic ash, alive with only a straw for breath. Training does not involve tactics. It does not teach survival. It teaches obedience to death. To fear is to fail. To hesitate is to betray. To retreat is to die, not at the hands of the enemy, but by your own squad. One survivor, only known as Subject 88-2241, was captured by an inquisitorial audit team after a planetary purge. He was found standing alone in a bunker surrounded by 173 enemy corpses. His legs were broken, his stomach was pierced, yet he remained standing, las rifle clutched in scorched hands. When interrogated, he answered every question with a single phrase: "We do not retreat." He was terminated when he refused to answer in High Gothic. Before death, he bit off his own tongue and smiled. Most regiments build camaraderie through shared suffering. The 88th builds silence. Talking is discouraged, bonds are prohibited. Those who show affection are reassigned to burial duty. A bond with another soldier is a distraction. Distractions get squads killed. The only loyalty permitted is to the regiment, and the regiment has one goal: to break the enemy through sheer, absolute inevitability. On Halox 5, the local PDF was ordered to assist the 88th in clearing out the remaining resistance. Only one squad of the PDF returned. Their commander, a man named Thoris Venk, was found curled in a supply crate, shivering. His eyes were gone, burned out by his own las pistol. He had carved a message into his armor with a fork. "I saw what they did to the wounded. I saw what they did to the children. They do not follow the Emperor. They are something else." Command deemed him unstable and ordered a mercy execution. On the battlefield, the 88th moves like a hive creature. No hand signals, no vocalizations. They seem to anticipate one another's movements without external communication. When wounded, they do not call for medics. When one falls, the others step over them. Their own medici corps is not designed for healing. Instead, they carry incendiary fluids and gene sealant acid. Wounded who cannot stand within 30 seconds are neutralized and reduced to biomass. The term biomass is not metaphorical. The 88th deploy mobile grinding units into every war zone. Fallen comrades and enemies alike are recycled. The resulting matter is used for field rations, trench reinforcement paste, and burn fuel. It is unclear whether the rank and file are aware of this, whether they know the nutrient bars they consume are made from those who marched beside them. Or perhaps they know and do not care. The first major campaign attributed to the 88th was the Siege of Golveris. A fortress world overrun by heretics, Golveris stood as an impregnable bastion. The Mechanicus deemed the loss of the planet as within acceptable limits. Multiple regiments were rotated through over 2 years. All failed. Then came the 88th. They were not expected to win, they were expected to buy time. Instead, within 3 months, Golveris was declared cleansed, not liberated, cleansed. No civilian population remained. The forges were melted into slag. The planetary core was destabilized. It is believed the 88th mined the mantle and detonated subsector fault lines to collapse entire hive arcologies. What few survivors remained were later executed by the Inquisition for fear of psychic contamination. A recovered data slate from a servitor scout found this line on a burnt wall: "We bury the heart so it cannot beat again." The 88th leaves messages like that, not propaganda, not warnings, just statements of absolute finality. They do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. Once they are deployed, there is only one outcome. Nothing survives. Not the enemy, not the memory. Sometimes not even the soil. Imperial Tactical Command attempted to disband the regiment following the events of Carson Prime. There, the 88th deployed without authorization following a minor Xenos uprising. By the time Imperial reinforcements arrived, the continent was reduced to cinder and glass. Satellite imagery revealed trench formations forming a massive symbolic eye, the same eye found in the heretical symbols of the Arcanesian schismatics. Whether this was coincidence or intentional was never clarified. The Ordo Hereticus deemed the regiment compromised. A kill order was issued. The fleet assigned to carry out the disbanding vanished. Years later, on a different world, a Munitorum transport vessel crash-landed during warp re-entry. Among the debris were grey-uniformed corpses, 88th insignia. The ship had no flight logs, no origin, no records of ever existing. There is no official record of the 88th's disbanding, because they were never truly a regiment. They were an answer to a question no one had the courage to ask. What happens when the Emperor's will is enforced without humanity? What happens when a sword is forged only to kill, never to be sheathed? A field commander on Verdun Ultima once joked that the 88th were just a myth, like commissars with a sense of humor. 2 weeks later, his bunker was discovered, filled with bone ash. On the wall behind his chair was smeared a single line of text in blood. "We heard you laughing." When the Inquisition questions survivors of 88th campaigns, most offer nothing. The few who speak recall only glimpses, rows of identical faces behind rebreathers, footsteps echoing in unison, men who never blink. One man claimed the regiment had no heartbeat, that he sat beside one for an hour and never once heard the thrum of life. Another claimed they bled smoke. An inquisitorial psyker sent to evaluate a battlefield after 88th deployment fell to his knees mid-audit and began screaming in binaric cant. His eyes burst. Before dying, he muttered, "The creed is inside me." He was incinerated before further analysis. The creed of the 88th is simple, not a prayer, not a hymn, not a litany. It is this: no mercy, no fear, no voice, no home, only war. Every soldier has it carved into their chest, surgically beneath the skin. It is said the wounds never fully heal, so they remember every day the reason they exist. They are not given medals. They do not celebrate victories. They are rewarded with new deployments. If they die, they are forgotten. If they live, they are reused. There is no upward promotion. Officers are chosen by longevity, not merit. Commissars assigned to the 88th often disappear. Those that survive speak rarely and drink heavily. One such commissar, identified only as Dren Malkoff, left a note before deserting his post. "They don't need me. They don't fear me. I thought I was there to enforce the creed. Then I realized I was the last one who believed in the Emperor, and they were just waiting for me to realize it." He was executed for cowardice and buried in an unmarked grave. That same night, the barracks he once commanded caught fire. All 20 soldiers inside were locked in. No evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle, only a message scorched into the ceiling. "Faith is for the weak. We have something stronger." As of this writing, no current Imperial records show the 88th Carnadon as an active regiment. Yet they continue to appear on worlds marked for cleansing, on stations overrun by unspeakable horrors, always unannounced, always unrecorded, a shadow deployment, a whisper in the dark, and when they leave, they take the silence with them, because the 88th does not retreat, and neither does death. Carnodan II was not a place people were born. It was a place they survived, a volcanic death world where the sky bled soot and lightning struck sideways. The winds carried razored ash and acidic dust. Children did not cry when born on Carnodan II. If they did, they choked. The air did not welcome softness. Even the trees grew sharp. Everything that lived on Carnodan II had a shell, claws, or the instinct to kill quickly. Those that didn't were already buried in the soot fields, bones fossilized in glass. It was here that the 88th Carnadon was forged. Not created, not recruited. Forged, like iron melted in magma. There was no Astra Militarum recruitment process, no conscription by noble decree. There were no nobles. The only law on Carnadon was survival, and survival was measured in aggression. The first trials began at the age of 5. Children were marked by age and body mass, weighed on the scales, and dropped into the warrens, a maze beneath the hive cities, left to collapse during the cataclysm centuries prior. The ones who found their way out were welcomed into the ash barrows. Those who didn't were assumed dead, or worse, changed. The warrens weren't empty. The echoes that haunted the tunnels were not just wind, and from the very first night, the children of the 88th understood something most soldiers learn far too late. Fear is useless. Fear delays the kill. Fear invites suffering. The ash barrows taught them that mercy was disobedience and hesitation was treason. Those who emerged from the warrens were greeted by no parents, no celebrations, no warm fires. They were stripped, shaved, branded with a number, and marched into formation halls. Vast steel vaults lined with devotional chains and picked feeds of martyred saints. Each feed repeated the same phrase in a loop: no mercy, no fear, no name, no voice, only war. There were no instructors in the formation halls. The walls themselves taught obedience. Food was rationed by compliance. If a child screamed, the wall electrocuted them. If they cried out during training, the floor dropped open beneath their feet. Failure meant death, and not metaphorically. It meant a trapdoor, a spike pit, a sudden puff of searing gas. There were no warnings, no second chances. The walls whispered in binaric chants. Every mistake made was watched, recorded, dissected. One child scratched an itch during a recitation. His hand was later found nailed to the mess hall ceiling. The purpose was not to create warriors, it was to destroy people. In the ashes of identity, the Imperium planted the creed. The pain collars ensured silence. Each child was fitted with one upon entering the first month of training. Any attempt to speak outside designated hours triggered an immediate shock. Prolonged defiance triggered a gas injection. No one survived a second injection. There were no medical exemptions. Sickness was weakness. Weakness was betrayal. Those who survived the first 3 years were given access to the kill pits. Here, things became worse. The kill pits were not drills. They were not sparring rings. They were live combat arenas. 12-year-olds were given dull blades and dropped into cages with convicts, mutants, heretics, deserters. The child who killed their opponent was moved on. The one who hesitated was torn apart. It was the first time many of them saw what it was like to die from hesitation. The convicts didn't beg. The children didn't cry. The cages echoed only with the sound of tearing flesh and gritted teeth. Only 1 out of every 10 initiates made it to graduation age. At 16, those who survived were issued a full flak set, a rebreather, and an indoctrinated las rifle. Their first official order was to shoot a former comrade who had broken formation protocol. The corpse was tied to a pole as a lesson. His crime was a smile during rations. Smiling without cause was listed under subversion. The 88th was never taught to believe in the Emperor as a savior, not on Carnadon II. There were no sermons about love, light, or golden thrones. The Emperor was not a father. The Emperor was fire. He was the volcanic fury that melted worlds. He was the final command before exterminatus. He was the voice you heard in the dark when you realized no one was coming to help. He did not protect. He demanded. That was faith. The chaplains of Carnadon did not sing hymns. They barked the creed in machine chant. Their mouths were stitched shut. Their voices came from vox implants. Each syllable was pre-recorded, assigned according to the psychological profile of the initiate. One chaplain's phrase, known only as Unit Vox H13, was said to cause spontaneous bleeding in 3% of listeners. Another, designated Vox Purge 7, was banned after its usage led to 10 spontaneous suicides during combat meditation. These were considered successes. Before deployment, initiates underwent what the formation halls referred to as unburial. The ritual involved being submerged in the ash chambers for a full night, naked, unarmed, blindfolded. The gas within the chambers was sulfuric and laced with neural inhibitors. You could not scream. You could not stand. All you could do was breathe in the weight of every failure that had come before you. If you emerged conscious, you were assigned to a squad. If not, your remains were recycled. The squad wasn't chosen by compatibility. It wasn't a unit of brothers or sisters or friends. The term squad was a designation, not a description. Squad cohesion was enforced with lethal implants. Every member of a fire team was linked to the others via an internal proximity network. If any member broke formation distance during combat, the entire team received a neural shock. If 2 broke formation simultaneously, one was randomly selected for immediate cardiac shutdown. This bred trust, but not of the traditional kind. You didn't trust your squad because you liked them. You trusted them because their error would kill you, and they trusted you the same way. One initiate, Subject 88-1197, recorded in a rare unsanctioned data fragment, was asked if he loved his squad. His answer, "I don't need to. We kill the same enemy. That's enough." He died 3 days later after stepping 3 meters away from his team during trench advancement drills. The system was working as intended. By the time a soldier of the 88th saw his first off-world deployment, he had killed more living beings than most veterans of the Cadian Gate. He had no concept of beauty, celebration, or home. His only comfort was the click of boots in unison, the silent signal of readiness, the weight of the creed beneath his skin. The training grounds of Carnadon II left their mark. Every soldier of the 88th bore internal scarring in the shape of the ash symbol, an inverted mountain pierced by a downward sword. It was not visible to the eye. Only the Medica units knew to look for it. A cut made during unburial, sealed with volcanic soot, pressed into the skin with a bone brander. Its purpose was not ceremonial, it was identification, because there were no names, no ranks, only the mark, only the number. Every soldier knew their number. And when they were called, they answered only by stepping forward. Silence was sacred. The homeworld of the 88th, if it could even be called a world, was declared quarantined by the Ordo Munitorum shortly after the regiment's third reappearance in combat records. Inquisitors deemed the spiritual practices of the formation halls borderline heretical. A team was dispatched to verify the conditions. They arrived during a seasonal storm. Within 12 hours, all communication ceased. The only signal that returned was a single word, repeated in encrypted High Gothic: complete. The Ordo deemed this sufficient and closed the file. Carnadon II was never visited again. What few picked captures remain of the planet show a red horizon forever choking on ash. Spires emerge from black plains like rusted blades. There are no stars visible above its sky, only the occasional flicker of violet lightning. The people, if they can be called that, who dwell beneath the surface do not answer hails. Their cities do not broadcast. Their archives are locked behind vocal encryptions that respond only to the creed. It is said that if you speak the words of the 88th in orbit over Carnadon, the storms go silent for one breath, and then they scream. The formation halls were never disbanded, even after the 88th was declared dissolved, even after half the galaxy believed them gone. Every 88th soldier who returns from deployment is absorbed back into the halls. Their memory is erased, their records scrubbed. No retirement, no medals, no rest, because war doesn't rest, and neither do the men born in its fire. Those who try to leave, if such a thing is even possible, are hunted, not by assassins, not by inquisitors, but by the very squads they once marched beside. One such case, detailed in a heavily redacted file labeled VIGIL88ESC, describes a former soldier attempting to escape the Ash World by stowing away on a trade barge. He was discovered 2 weeks later in the ship's waste recycler, dismembered. His blood used to write the phrase "unfinished flame" across the hull. The ship never reported the presence of the 88th, but they didn't need to. The regiment always finishes what it starts. To be born on Carnadon II is to be assigned a death sentence with no date. You will kill until there is nothing left to kill. You will bleed until the ground remembers your name, even if no one else will. You will march until your boots fuse to your bones, and even then you will march. Because there is no return. Because Carnadon is not home. Carnadon is the crucible, and once it burns you down, it does not let go. The 88th Carnadon has no heroes. No statues line the halls of its dead. No war songs are sung of their victories. In truth, there are no names to remember, only numbers and the silence they leave behind. A soldier of the 88th is born, trained, deployed, and erased in sequence. Memory is a luxury. Identity is a danger. The only past that matters is the creed carved beneath the skin. It begins at birth, or as close to it as Carnadon II allows. The Ashborn are not cradled. They are inspected, measured. If their lungs do not rupture from the soot-laced air, they are branded with a mark, a circle with a downward slash, denoting viable. Their birth names are recorded only once, on a scrap of vellum that is immediately incinerated. What remains is a number sealed into an iron tag affixed to the child's neck. It is not removable. The flesh around it is treated to fuse with the metal. They are never called by anything else. Their voices are taken before they even understand what they mean. By the age of 3, the child is introduced to the initiation silence. This is not just the absence of speech, it is the conditioning of instinct. Any sound above a regulated decibel triggers disciplinary pain pulses. Sound sensors are embedded into every wall. If a child laughs, they are starved. If they whisper, they are flogged. If they cry, they are drowned. There is a saying among the instructors: the tongue is the leash of the soul. Cut it, and the soul follows. By 5, most initiates have stopped trying to speak entirely. It is not uncommon for the tongue to atrophy, but silence is only the first lesson. The next is solitude. Though trained in massive collectives, the children of the 88th are systematically denied bonding. Room rotations are randomized every 48 hours. Any attempt at repeated contact is flagged. Mutual assistance during drills is punished as collusion. If 2 children are found helping one another climb a wall or lift a weapon, they are separated and reassigned to opposite hemispheres of the facility. Repeated violations result in segregated correction, solitary darkness for up to 30 days. It is not the pain that breaks them, it's the unspoken truth. They are not meant to be people. They are not comrades, not sons, not friends. They are not even individuals. They are weapons, and weapons do not play, weapons do not laugh, weapons do not cry. Those who resist the conditioning, who try to hold on to some shred of identity, are selected for the tower. The tower is not a place, it is a program. No one knows what happens inside. The only record that exists is a ledger of numbers marked transformed. Those who return do not speak of it. Their eyes are different, their skin pale, their heartbeat often missing or irregular. Some believe the tower is where the last vestiges of humanity are removed, surgically, spiritually, or both. A saying among the trainers: steel is made in the tower. And it is said that only the steel returns. The process of becoming useful is not one of growth, but of reduction. Every year, a child of the 88th loses something. First their name, then their voice, then their connections, then their memories, then the need to dream, then the desire to live. By adolescence, what remains is a shell programmed to follow the creed. No mercy, no fear, no voice, no home, only war. They do not celebrate birthdays. There is no calendar in the formation halls. Time is measured in missions, drills, and recovery cycles. An initiate does not ask how old they are. They do not know what year it is. They do not know what sector they are in. They only know their number and the orders they are given. Some do not even remember their own faces. Mirrors are banned. Reflection is considered subversive. The logic is simple. The more one sees oneself, the more one begins to think of oneself. The 88th cannot afford self-conception. A soldier who thinks they are a person may hesitate, may question, may wonder if this is all there is. But for the 88th, this is all there is. Childhood ends before memory begins, and the lack of a name ensures there is nothing to go back to. There is no trauma, because there is no before. There is no longing, because there is no contrast. There is only the now and the next order. Psychological profiling conducted by external observers, those rare few permitted to interview the 88th's inductees, revealed disturbing patterns. Soldiers responded positively to images of death, negatively to images of family. When shown pictures of battlefields and cities in flames, they showed increased neural stimulation. When shown a child being held by a mother, they exhibited signs of hostility. When asked why, the response was always the same. The child is not learning, the mother is the failure. It is said that the 88th does not view civilians as people. Civilians are obstacles, failures, proof that the Imperium has become soft. Every regiment that retreats, that evacuates, that tries to protect the weak, these are not brothers in arms to the 88th. They are liabilities. The indoctrination ensures that empathy is not just lacking, it is inverted. To care is to weaken the species. To forgive is to betray the mission. To love is to remember a name, and the 88th has none. Even their instructors are numbered. Designations like Handler 42 or Instructor 9 are common. Faces are masked. There is no recognition. The child never sees the same instructor twice. Voices are modulated. The lessons are taught via picked feed and harsh, stim-triggered reinforcement. Those who learn faster are not rewarded. Rewards breed expectation. Expectation breeds softness. Excellence is not praised. It is expected. Failure is punished. And survival is mandatory. Every moment in the formation halls is a test. Sleep chambers are randomized. Beds are removed if the child is found sleeping past the designated 30-minute REM slot. Dreams are monitored. Those who talk in their sleep are awakened with electric shock. Sleepwalkers are tranquilized and removed. It is not known where they go. Speculation is discouraged. The children who make it to operational age are physically indistinguishable. Same hair length, same muscle tone, same posture. Their eyes are dulled. They do not smile. They do not blink unnecessarily. They move in step. They speak only when prompted, and even then in clipped monosyllables. In many ways, they are already dead. Their bodies remain, their weapons are sharp. But the child that once laughed, once reached for a parent, once asked, why? That child is buried in ash. In the rare case that a soldier of the 88th attempts to recover their identity, when a whisper of the past flickers through the neural fog, they are purged. One case in particular became infamous among Formation Hall's command, Subject 88-3305, a squad leader, decorated in the field with over 400 confirmed kills during the siege of Vorsk. Known for exceptional formation compliance. One day, he stopped firing mid-battle, not to retreat, not to hesitate, but to look at the face of a dying child. He stood there, silent, breathing, staring at her blood. And then he said a word, not his number, not the creed. He said, Lesser. A name, one not recorded in any registry. He was extracted within the hour. Witnesses claim his squad executed him on the spot. Others say he was taken to the tower. No one saw him again. A week later, the entire unit was redeployed, not to a battlefront, but to a penal world scheduled for chemical cleansing. No tactical necessity, no enemy presence, just an ash field, a factory, and a population of 100,000 undocumented workers. When the 88th left, nothing remained but slag. Some say it was punishment for remembering, a reminder that in the 88th Carnadon, memory is a heresy. To name something is to love it. To love something is to fear losing it. And fear has no place in the regiment. They are not men, they are not sons, they are not brothers. They are ghosts in grey, marching to orders that do not require explanation, fighting wars that do not require justification. And when they fall, no one will weep, because no one remembers their name. In the annals of Carnadon's training regimes, there is one entry that appears only in whispers, footnotes, and redacted transcripts. Its name is never officially recorded. No inquisitorial file references it directly. No audio logs survive from within, but its effects are universally understood. The phrase is passed between scribes, scrawled into supply crates, scratched into trench walls, murmured by the few survivors who make it through the formation halls and still retain a flicker of imagination. They call it the meat drill. The meat drill is not part of standard formation doctrine. It is not discussed in initial indoctrination. In fact, it is unknown to initiates until the day it begins. There is no warning, no announcement, just a change in tone. One moment, the training follows its cruel, methodical rhythms. Firing drills, pain resistance, obedience conditioning. The next, the lights go out, the doors seal, the food stops. Then the silence comes, not the forced silence of the halls. A different kind, a silence that feels watched. That silence lasts between 12 hours and 3 days. No sleep is permitted, rationing is withheld. The only sound is the metallic hum of the rebreather ducts and the soft hiss of unseen vents. Then the doors open, and the drill begins. What happens inside is never officially documented. Every attempt to chronicle it has ended in madness, death, or complete silence. Those who survive it never speak of it again, not due to fear, but because something fundamental within them has been shattered. But fragments leak, and those fragments are more than enough. The meat drill is said to be the final test before deployment, the breaking point, the stripping away of the last tissue of humanity, not a trial of strength, not even a test of obedience, a test of irreversibility. Once completed, a soldier cannot go back, not to the halls, not to the tower, not to themselves. The most common rumor is that the drill involves real flesh, not meat in the sense of battlefield exposure or rationing of protein. Real flesh, living, screaming, the remains of those who failed the earlier phases. Or worse, those who tried to desert. Their bodies, still warm, are presented as test material, not to bury, not to burn, but to use. Use how? That's where the whisper ends. Some say it's forced consumption. Others say it's a demonstration of surgical capability, with each initiate required to dissect a fallen brother and repurpose his remains into field-ready supplies, light charges from bone, wiring from sinew. A few insist the drill involves combat, pitting initiates against one another, in a zero-light maze, the only rule being survival. But whatever the truth, all accounts agree on this. The ones who emerge are never the same. Their eyes lose focus, their hands stop trembling, they stop asking questions in their sleep. They are finally ready, and more importantly, they are finally empty. The trainers refer to the post-drill soldiers as clean, as in clean of doubt, clean of memory, clean of self. Some command notes indicate these soldiers exhibit faster kill response, reduced hesitation, and a total suppression of emotional deviation. One report from Field Overseer Grave Regiment reads, "The batch post-drill exhibited remarkable cohesion, no unit deviation, no retraction reflex under autogun fire. When asked about the engagement, the squad remained mute for 6 hours, then executed the interrogator who asked, 'Clean batch, very clean.' The Death Corps are said to admire discipline. The Catechans admire toughness. The 88th admire cleanness. Because only when all identity is gone can the creed truly take root. The drill isn't just a test of cruelty, it's the final sacrament, the act of absolute dehumanization, not just to break the initiate, but to make them into an object that cannot be broken again. Rumors persist that even the chaplains refuse to enter the meat drill chambers, that servitors are used to clean them, that the air inside carries a frequency that disables Auspex readings, that there is screaming, not audible, but spiritual. One psyker assigned to monitor the halls during the drill cycle went blind within 30 minutes. His final words, before he clawed out his own throat, were, "They're not feeding the soldiers, they're feeding the place." Which raises a question no one dares answer. What if the meat drill is not a drill? What if it's a ritual, a rite, a baptism into something deeper than doctrine? Something older than the Imperium, a hunger. The results speak for themselves. Post-drill squads are deployed into war zones with a 97% operational lethality rate. They move faster, they bleed less, they hesitate never. Command has even noted anomalous behavior, squads surviving conditions that should have incinerated them, showing up in sectors they were never deployed to, surviving planetary exterminatus protocols with no explanation, and always remaining silent. In one case, an entire batch of 88th troopers was presumed dead during a failed drop on Asthanera. Their insertion craft was destroyed by warp turbulence, all Vox signals lost. Recovery teams found nothing. A month later, an entire cultist enclave was found butchered in the swamps near the crash zone. Their bodies were stacked in ritual spirals. At the center, a las rifle with the serial tag of 88-2047, last logged as KIA. The swamp was deemed tainted and burned. No explanation given. When asked to clarify what may have happened, one surviving member of another regiment simply said, "They drilled deeper than us. Now they're beneath everything." Others, who have seen the 88th post-drill, report the smell. Not the expected scent of chemical oils or sweat, but of old meat, decayed, preserved by something unnatural, not rot, not life, something in between. One tech priest described it as biological latency. Another term used is flesh sleep, the idea that the body remembers its past victims and dreams, that after the drill, the soldier is no longer a person, but a receptacle of cumulative butchery, a walking totem of death. The term is not metaphoric. After the drill, the body changes, increased bone density, heightened muscle tone, reduced pain response, unusual scarring along the spine, possibly self-inflicted. And the eyes, always the eyes, pupils that remain dilated even in full light, staring at nothing, or maybe at what only they can now see. Some observers claim the 88th never blink, not because they don't need to, but because they're afraid of what they might miss when they close their eyes. And beneath it all, the silence deepens. The 88th post-drill are known to kill without command, to preempt enemy ambushes, to act as if they already know the outcome, as if the drill didn't just remove their humanity, but gave them something else in return, something cold, something quiet, and something very, very permanent. The whispers grow that the meat drill is not a place or a program, but a doorway, that those who pass through it do not return, not really. They wear the same armor, hold the same rifles, march in the same lines, but something else looks out through their eyes, something that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bribed, cannot be stopped. A soldier of the 88th who has passed the drill is no longer a soldier. He is an execution protocol, a silent erasure, an echo of a system too efficient to fail and too inhuman to question. There is no coming back. There is no confession. There is no cure. The only mercy is that the drill does not speak, and neither do those who survive it. Only the sound of boots in ash and the smell of old sleeping meat. The first recorded deployment of the 88th Carnadon after the completion of its new generation was on Halux 5. The official brief described the situation as unstable but containable, a minor uprising, mutant insurrection, no external Xenos threat, low-grade corruption, expected duration of engagement 4 months, troops assigned 2 regiments from the 31st Cadian, light mechanized support, PDF support available. What actually happened was extinction. When the 88th arrived, the PDF was still operational, barely. They had dug in around the hive's perimeter, shielding civilian refugees, waiting for the next deployment wave. When the dropships came, the PDF expected relief. They did not expect grey-armored troopers to walk past them without a word. They did not expect them to shoot the wounded. They did not expect the purifiers to begin hosing down the civilians with flame. The 88th was not there to help. They were there to end it. No mercy, no exceptions. The first engagement occurred 40 minutes after atmospheric entry. The 88th made no defensive formations. They advanced in squares, shoulder to shoulder, through the central refinery sector. No orders were given. No cover was taken. When mutant snipers opened fire, the 88th didn't even flinch. They marched into the fire. When a man fell, the one behind him stepped over. No break in rhythm, no hesitation, no deviation. The enemy didn't break, they simply died. Those that tried to flee were herded into the slag corridors. Laser fire cut through steel, flesh, and screams indiscriminately. There were no calls for surrender, no attempts at interrogation. The creed permitted no restraint, only obliteration. And yet this was not the most terrifying part. That came after the fighting ended. Once the mutants were dead, the 88th turned inward. They began cleansing the civilians, systematically, without emotion, without cruelty, without hesitation. One woman, found alive days later beneath a transport hub, recounted seeing her entire family lined up and silenced. She said the soldiers didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even speak. They simply walked the rows, pulling triggers with surgical calm. No fury, no rage, just the mechanical rhythm of death. She had survived by playing dead beneath her son's body. She later died in an off-world refugee center, curled in a fetal position, whispering the same phrase over and over. The face didn't blink, the gun didn't tremble, he wasn't killing, he was cleaning. The 31st Cadian command structure, still stationed in the outer defensive ring, attempted to intervene. They demanded clarification on the 88th's engagement protocol. When they received no answer, they issued a ceasefire order. It was ignored. When a Cadian field officer attempted to approach the 88th Command Unit, he was shot through the neck without warning. His second-in-command tried to retaliate. He and his squad were never seen again. By the time Orbital Command reviewed the situation, it was already over. The hive had been declared cleansed. No life signs detected. The atmosphere was poisoned. The food reserves destroyed. The Vox net melted. Officially, the 88th had completed its mission. But there was no mention of the 40,000 unarmed civilians, no record of the PDF losses, no explanation for the civilian shelters turned into incineration wards, no justification for the mass graves. Just a final report signed only with the designation 88/completed/HaloXV. No names, no witnesses, no bodies, just ash. From that point forward, the 88th was changed in the eyes of the Imperium. They were not shock troops, not siege breakers, not veterans. They were a tool, a razor to be used when infection had spread too far, a silence that followed command failure. The 88th was no longer deployed to win wars. They were deployed to erase the memory of them. The psychological profile of the regiment evolved accordingly. They did not function like soldiers. They didn't banter. They didn't share rations. They didn't engage in ritual or prayer. They slept when told, fought when needed, and waited in absolute stillness for the next order. In one file, a Commisar noted the following after a week-long trench operation. They do not display fear. That much is expected. But what unsettles me is that they do not display joy either. No satisfaction in victory, no aggression in bloodletting. They kill like clocks tick, as if existence is a task to be completed, not experienced. But why? Why had the 88th become this? The answer was simple. Because to kill without mercy, you must first kill the part of yourself capable of asking why. You must kill the child who once cried. You must kill the man who once loved. You must kill the soldier who once doubted, and you must do it over and over again until there is nothing left but duty. And duty stripped of belief becomes mechanism. The 88th was not evil. They were not zealous. They were emptied. No prayers, no tears, no second thoughts. Only the cold logic of utility. A mission either failed or completed. The only variable was how long it would take. Halox 5 proved this, but it was only the beginning. As word spread of the 88th's capabilities, high-level commands began requesting them, not to defend or liberate, but to end. Entire theaters were cleared of all life in days. Hive networks collapsed. Uprisings died mid-scream. Panic spread before they arrived. The mere rumor of their presence sent cult cells into suicide pacts. They didn't bring hope, they brought silence. And silence in the Imperium is sacred. Some regiments began using the 88th as a threat. Fall back, or we'll call the 88th. Speak heresy again, and the 88th will clean your family. The phrase became common slang among frontline trenches. Better to die in fire than to be cleaned in grey. And always the question loomed. How did they do it? How could men kill without question, destroy without resistance? The answer lay in what the 88th lacked. Emotion, not controlled emotion, absent emotion. Neural scans of detained 88th troopers, rare as they were, showed suppressed amygdala responses, no empathy triggers, no social mirroring, stimulus-based behavior tied only to objective-based memory clusters. In one scan, a soldier was shown images of a child being burned alive, no reaction. When shown a faulty laser gun schematic, however, he blinked twice and tapped his thigh. His concern wasn't the death, it was the inefficiency. They are not sadistic, they are not numb, they are precise. like bone saws, like data wipes, like terminal commands, a whisper, an erasure, a final keystroke, a system with no need for conscience and no use for forgiveness. They do not speak, they do not write, they do not remember. The memory of a crime is only useful if someone survives to recount it, and no one ever survives the 88th. On Halox 5, after the cleansing, nothing remained, not even the bones, not even the records, just the air and a blackened symbol scratched into the inner walls of the hive's heart, a circle with a slash, the mark of the regiment, the mark of the end. Golveris was not a war zone when the 88th Carnadon arrived. It was a forge world, functional, compliant, and barely maintaining quota. Its air was breathable only through recirculated filters, its surface a sprawl of hissing furnaces and mag-cladded manufactorums. For centuries, Golveris operated in the background, unnoticed, unimportant, until the fire inside it turned heretic. The uprising began in the data, small errors in output reports, a forge spire increasing weapon yields without authorization, a minor discrepancy in fuel consumption. The Mechanicus dismissed it at first, until the tech priests overseeing the forges began disappearing, and in their place, something else emerged. Skinned servitors with binary sigils carved into their skulls, misshapen workers who spoke in loops, whispering praise to something that had no name. When the first Magos sent a detachment to investigate, they vanished into the sub-forges. The second detachment came back with one survivor. Just one. He had torn out his own Vox implant and scratched the words into his flesh. They smile now, even the dead smile. What was happening on Golveris was not rebellion. It was mutation of thought, of flesh, of purpose. And when the Mechanicus realized it was no longer a matter of productivity, but ideology, they sent the request, not for exterminatus, not for investigation, but for the 88th. The first drop pod landed without Vox announcement. It didn't require one. Golveris's skies burned red as the ash from malfunctioning forge cyclers rose across the skyline, drowning the stars. The 88th emerged in lines, grey uniforms unblemished by insignia. They carried no banners, no picture recorders, no officers to parley. Just fire teams of 4, eyes hidden, movements synchronized, and behind them, the grinders. Mobile reclamation tanks, rolling harvesters, painted black, humming with unseen power. They came not to fight, but to clean. The defenders of Golveris, those who hadn't been turned, never received confirmation of alliance. They didn't know whether to stand down or join in, so they watched, from a distance, from the rooftops, from the shadows, and they saw. They saw what happened when the 88th entered the forges. There were no firefights, no prolonged sieges, no negotiations. The 88th moved like a flood through the sub-spires. Lasfire did not echo. It hissed, silent and brutal. Vox recordings captured only fragments before signals went dead. They don't stop burning. There's no screaming, just heat. We tried to hold the production line. They melted it all, like it offended them. It's not cleansing, it's forgetting. One by one, the spires went dark. Not just offline, dark. Even Mechanicus records failed to track internal power signatures. No heat, no energy trails, just silence. By the end of the first week, 2/3 of the sub-facilities had been purged. Not a single life sign remained, not even rats. One of the last surviving engine seers, Magos Kin Vahaun, attempted to vox into the 88th command frequency. His transmission was short, unrecorded. His corpse was found the next day with his own mechadendrites twisted around his throat. Written on the floor in machine oil was a symbol, a circle, a slash, and a line beneath it, like a mouth, smiling. The defenders began to whisper. They spoke of something moving through the underfactories. Not soldiers, not machines, but shapes. Smiling faces burned into metal. Corpses hung upside down from the air ducts with their mouths stretched impossibly wide. One survivor claimed to have followed an 88th fire team for several hours, trying to understand their target. He watched them clear a floor, torching everything. walls, terminals, even the floor tiles. Then one of them stopped, stared at a broken pick display showing a child's face, perhaps a leftover training file. The trooper paused for 7 seconds, then pulled a blade from his boot and carved a smile into his helmet. Not painted, carved, and then, without a word, kept moving. At first, Command believed the 88th was simply thorough. Then came the gas reports. Areas previously cleansed were resealed. The 88th moved back in, this time with canisters. The same regions were reignited, twice, 3 times. What were they trying to destroy? What was so dangerous it had to be erased again and again? The question was never answered, because anyone who entered those chambers afterwards came out smiling, and then stopped moving. The 88th began purging loyalist survivors, administratum clerks, engine seers, even unarmed maintenance crews. The reason? Unclear. All records list them as compromised. No appeals were heard, no mercy was given, and through it all, the grinders kept rolling. They left no ash, no bone, no evidence, just clean steel. By the 2nd month, Golveris had stopped transmitting entirely. The stars above the planet dimmed from the smoke, the atmosphere thickened, entire districts collapsed. The defenders, those few who still had hope, sent a final request for extraction. It was denied. The Imperium had already written Golveris off. Because the 88th was there now, and when the 88th is deployed, there is only one outcome, not victory, not reclamation, but silence. 1 week later, Golveris was declared spiritually sterilized, not liberated, not secured, sterilized, a term rarely used, reserved only for instances when the soul of a world is deemed beyond redemption. A forge world, once loyal, once proud, once humming with the voice of the Omnissiah, now reduced to a crater of clean metal and bad memories. And the 88th, gone, not extracted, not reassigned, just gone. No ships were seen leaving. No Vox trails were recorded. They had come, they had erased, they had disappeared. The only trace of their presence was a message embedded deep in the core of one of the final pick nodes, extracted by a data savant years later. A simple line in binary: smiles are evidence of unfinished work. And that was all. The legend of Golveris lives on in whispered barrack tales and the fearful reports of other regiments. They say the dead still smile beneath the slag, that if you walk the burned-out corridors of the old forges, you'll see silhouettes in the ash, arms at their sides, heads tilted slightly, mouths carved into grotesque grins. Not from joy, from completion, because when the 88th is finished, all that remains are echoes, and the dead. The dead always smile. The Imperium of man is built on obedience. Obedience to the Emperor. Obedience to the Creed. Obedience to the chain of command, which runs from the smallest PDF corporal to the faceless lords of terror. Obedience is the glue that binds the madness together, and without it, the entire edifice would shatter into blood and ash. So when the orders began arriving without signatures, unmarked, unsealed, untraceable, the administratum took notice, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they bore a color no one had ever seen on formal deployment briefs: crimson. The wax was not the red of Martian decrees, not the violet of inquisitorial override, not the gold of ecclesiarchy rites. It was deep, unnatural, glossless, as though the wax had been mixed with clotted blood, then dried with quiet intent. The first Crimson Order appeared on Iceless Prime. The world was stable, or so it seemed. A harsh, frost-bound mining world feeding promethium to half a sector. Its planetary governor had served faithfully for 67 years. There was no active heresy, no uprisings, no indication of treachery or sedition. The order came through a Vox channel that didn't exist on any record. No encryption, no code, just coordinates, a timestamp, and a regiment designation. 88th Carnadon. No one questioned it. Because no one dared, the order didn't go through standard Astra Militarum channels. It arrived in the office of the planetary governor directly, sealed, crimson. He opened it, read the one-line directive, and hanged himself in his throne room. His last message was carved into the throne with a blunt servo stylus. I kept my quota, I prayed, I paid tithes. Why? No answer came. The 88th deployed that same night. No orbital signatures, no landing clearance. One moment the snow was falling, the next the sky opened and they were there, marching through the ice with boots that did not slip, eyes hidden behind rebreathers, uniforms already flecked with frost before they hit the ground. They did not consult local command, did not ask for reports. They simply moved. Hive after hive fell. Not in battle, but in silence. No explosions, no vox chatter, just long, echoing screams, half swallowed by the wind. The first regiment to witness it and live was the 92nd Amaran. They were stationed at the Eastern Polar Refinery Complex awaiting redeployment. Their commander, Colonel Erasure Valn, reported seeing a column of the 88th moving through the outer trench line. His men stood to salute. They didn't respond, didn't break stride. Then one of Valn's men, Sergeant Horlin, made a fatal mistake. He tried to make conversation. He called out, "Emperor's grace be with you." The nearest 88th trooper raised his weapon and shot him through the throat. No pause, no hesitation, one motion. Valn responded by ordering a stand down. He raised his hands, shouted into the vox, tried every channel. No response. The 88th fire team continued walking, and behind them the refinery began to burn, not from explosives, but from the inside. The slag tanks ruptured, the coolant systems boiled over, the servitor maintenance lines began melting one by one, their vocal emitters playing a low humming tune no one could identify. And in the smoke, Valon saw them, the 88th, wiping the ice from their visors, still walking, still silent, still smiling. Because by now, some of them had started carving those smiles into their masks. The practice had become common after Golveris, not ordered, not regulated, just adopted, a voluntary transformation, a mockery of human expression, or a promise. Later, during tribunal inquiry 4059, Valn tried to explain what he'd seen. He lasted 2 sentences. Then his nose began to bleed. He screamed in binary. His skin tore open along the arms in symmetrical lines. He died after 6 minutes of spasms, every muscle in his face locked in a grin. The scribes sealed the file, declared it contaminant exposure. But the truth had already spread. The Crimson Orders were not normal deployments. They were purges, internal, directed not at enemies of the Imperium, but within it. Compliant worlds, faithful regiments, sub-fleets that had missed a tithe deadline by a single day, civilized sectors whose populations grew too fast. They weren't heretics, they weren't mutants, they weren't corrupted, they were reminders that survival was not reward, that obedience did not guarantee safety, that the price of failure was not always death, but cleansing. Somewhere in the labyrinth of the Munitorum, someone was sending Crimson Orders with one intention, to remind the Imperium of its fragility. And the 88th Carnadon was their scalpel. They didn't need to be briefed. They didn't need to be paid. They didn't even need transport. They just arrived. The second known Crimson Order appeared in the Narix Belt, 5 orbital stations orbiting a dead sun, running a penal mining operation. The workforce was 80% prison labor, overseen by the 404th Penal Guard and 2 Mechanicus overseers. No reports of rebellion, no psyker interference, no cult activity. The Crimson Order arrived through a dead servitor. It wandered into the command dome of Station Zeros with a scroll nailed to its chest, the wax still soft, the seal still fresh. It wasn't blood. It wasn't paint. It was something else. The station commander read the scroll, then shot himself in the head. The logs recorded exactly 12 minutes of nothing. Then the outer bulkheads blew open, and the 88th walked through vacuum, like it was mist. No armor breaches, no decompression gear, just grey, cold men, smiling. It took them 17 hours to purge all 5 stations. The Vox logs ended with the phrase, "Compliance achieved, echoes remain, recommend silence, no survivors, no justification." When asked why the 88th was sent, the Ordo Logistica declared the answer classified. The Mechanicus stated no records of a Crimson Protocol existed in their lexicon. The Inquisition declined to comment. And across the Imperium, fear bloomed like a tumor. Because now, the 88th wasn't just a myth. They weren't just punishment, they were a mechanism, a final tool for those high enough to no longer explain themselves, and they were being used. Again and again, Crimson Order, arrival, silence, nothing remained. A new term spread among the troopers in the trenches, whispered behind sandbags and oil drums. Crimson cleansing. It meant death, not just physical death, but erasure. Total purgation, wiped from records, removed from memory. A void where once there was history, and the 88th were the architects of that void. But not everyone was silent. One man tried to speak out. Lieutenant Marshal Cadius Morn of the 22nd Dravoxian, a decorated veteran, survivor of 2 Tyrannid incursions and a Black Crusade, wrote a formal protest to Segmentum Command after witnessing a Crimson Purge on Brontes 4. He claimed the 88th executed over 70 Loyalist Guard units under pretense of failure to maintain formation. He said their actions bordered on inhuman and post-human. He included footage, Vox clips, personal interviews. A full transcript of his account was hand-delivered to Terra. The courier was never heard from again. Morn was arrested, not by commissars, not by Arbites, by his own men. His regiment was dissolved. Those who protested were branded as cult-affiliated. His trial lasted 6 minutes. The sentence was not death, it was deployment to Golveris. Even though Golveris had already been cleansed, he was dropped into the slag, alone, without gear. His final Vox signal lasted 12 seconds. It ended with him screaming, then laughing, then begging for the regiment to speak to him. But they never do. Because the 88th doesn't explain, they don't justify, they don't reveal, they execute. And when the orders come in crimson, they obey, without mercy, without fear, without question. Because whatever the Imperium has made them into, it is beyond discipline, beyond control, beyond humanity. And in that silence there is one truth. The 88th Carnadon does not serve. It cleans. The errors, the weak, the heretical, the obedient who've forgotten that obedience is not protection, but probation. And when that probation ends, there is no appeal, no trial, no flag, just crimson wax and the sound of boots in the snow. They didn't carry their dead, not because they were heartless, not because they forgot the names of the fallen, but because every ounce of flesh left behind meant they could move faster, strike harder, and kill longer. The Vasilan 104th knew that sentiment got you killed, and in war, the greatest kindness you could offer your dead was vengeance. Out here, in the shale valleys of Procool 6, the ground devoured the weak and the sentimental. The sky never cleared, the sun never showed. The rocks were ash-colored bones, jagged and pitted by artillery from a war no one remembered starting. When the 104th arrived, there was already no one left to bury, just empty shells of men with tags in their boots and helmets full of dirt. The 104th made no graves. They made promises, no body, no burden. The creed was whispered before drops, not yelled, not chanted, whispers, like a prayer they didn't want the Emperor to hear, because even he might not approve of how far they were willing to go. Corporal Lurin watched his squad move through the collapsed refinery yard like shadows over rusted bones. The place stank of chemdrain and liquefied corpses. The heretic forces, something loosely calling itself the Scourge Truth, had made this place into a fortress. Now it was a crypt, and every rusted gantry above was draped in human skin, stitched with scripture. Private Hessel stepped on a wire, not a mine, a voice trigger, a servo skull, long dead, flickered and spoke. "The flesh is false, let it be remade." A second later, the Vox channel flared with garbled binary. Lorraine barely had time to yell before the first bolt round hit the wall next to him. The ambush wasn't clever. It didn't need to be. The scourged truth weren't human anymore. They screamed like they were in pain when they fired. The firefight lasted 4 minutes. 17 heretics died. 2 guardsmen fell, Torren and Bex. Lorraine knew he should be counting more. But luck, or spite, or some emperor-forsaken ghost had let the rest live. Torren was the youngest in the fire team, a kid from Vasila's northern ridge cities, barely out of his skin-thin training carapace. Bex had been harder, older, bitter, silent. She kept the rest of the squad honest just by existing. They both bled out in the refinery, surrounded by effigies and machines that screamed their death songs through corrupted hymnals. Lurin stared at the bodies. Then he turned away. "We move," he said. "Sir," muttered Dren, the heavy gunner. "Bex, she's—" "We move," Lorraine said again, his voice like granite cracking. Dren said nothing more. They didn't carry their dead. Instead, they stripped the tags, took the vox beads, retrieved ammunition and functioning gear, and then, with silent nods, they placed a single crack grenade on each corpse, timed, not remote. By the time the scourged truth sent scavengers, nothing remained but blood-soaked craters and twisted bone. No body, no burden. They moved again under cover of ash wind and the scent of promethium decay. In the field logs of the 104th, there were no entries for corpse retrievals, not because it wasn't protocol, but because it was expected. Vasilan doctrine had learned the hard way that every time they tried to carry one of their own out, another 3 died doing it, so they stopped. They let the rocks claim the flesh, and in turn, the rocks whispered to the living, "Survive, or you will become part of the dust." Captain Reelan once said, during the 3rd secession of the Kaimor front, "If you fall, die in a way that's hard to remember. That's the last mercy we can give you." He said it after burning an entire hab block to deny the enemy access to his wounded platoon. The regiment didn't question him. Later, when the Astra Militarum auditors reviewed the battle data, they found Reelan's casualty list was half its projected estimate. They promoted him, gave him a purity seal he never wore. The Vasilan 104th kept the seal in a case. They used it to light low sticks. What they remembered instead was Reelan's silence. The way he stood over his men's corpses, one boot on a spent laspack, lighting the fuse himself. No priest, no rites, just flame and silence. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they refused to become what they killed. The scourged truth kept their dead. They paraded them, hung them from augmetic chains, sewed mouths shut with prayers to false gods. Even now, as the 104th moved deeper into the scorched valleys, they found rows of bodies lashed to poles, each with their chests cut open, each whispering through vox implants, long past failing. "We have no fear, we have no end." The messages played on loop. Some were in binary, some in high Gothic, but backwards. Some bled pink light from their tongues. Sergeant Valis ordered them all silenced. "Shoot them?" asked Dren. "No," Valis said. "Talk to them." Dren tilted his head. "Every time they send us a sermon," Valis said, "we send one back." He walked to the nearest corpse, a bloated thing barely holding shape, and began whispering. The men watched. After a minute, the vox implant in the corpse let out a strangled buzz, then went silent. "What did you say?" Lorraine asked. Valis just smiled. "No body," he said, "no burden." When they reached the refinery's heart, the scourged truth had left a gift, one of their own. Still alive. Still human, tied to a throne of bone and rebreather tubes, fingers skinned down to the muscle, eyes wired open. A scribe, maybe, or a prisoner of some importance. His nameplate was flayed but hung from a chain on his ribs. Alict, a loyalist name. He wheezed when he saw them. The 104th raised their weapons, but he didn't flinch. He just whispered through blood and broken teeth. "They eat the soul, not the body they wear." Lurin crouched beside him. What did you see? Too much. What did they want? To remember. And then, without warning, he bit off his own tongue, died choking on it, his throat full of prayer fragments. Dren turned away. Valis holstered his last pistol. Burn it, he said. But he's loyal, said Hessel. He's one of us. Not anymore. They didn't argue. They lit the throne. The screams lasted longer than they should have. But when the flames died, the air was lighter. The refinery was truly dead, and whatever trace of the scourge truth had lingered here was now just smouldering grease on rusted steel. No one spoke of Alec again, not in the logs, not in their dreams. They forgot him the way the regiment always forgot, deliberately, sharply, with intention. Back at camp, the medici made a note in the ledger, not a name, just casualty 0449-Phi, disposed, reason, tactical sanitization. No body, no burden. They drank ration spirits that night, in silence, no songs, no rites. In other regiments, they toasted the dead. In the Vasilan 104th, they toasted the living, because they knew how few would remain by next dawn. The war wasn't over. The scourge truth had tunneled deeper. Their rituals had grown bolder. Their dead now walked at night without sound. But the 104th had something no chaos cult could mimic, the cold refusal to break. No mercy, no fear. And when they died, they would vanish without a trace. Because in this war, the only thing heavier than a corpse was the memory of it. In most regiments of the Astra Militarum, the Commisar stands above the rank and file, a figure of fear, discipline, and imperial righteousness. His bolt pistol enforces loyalty. His black coat radiates authority. To question a Commisar is to question the will of the Emperor. But the 88th Carnadon were not like most regiments. The incident occurred on the blasted plains of Brackhull 5 during what was supposed to be a routine pacification. The planet had rebelled twice before. This time, there would be no clemency. That was the assumption when the 88th was deployed. The Carnadons arrived under thunder and ash, deployed from dropships that scorched the earth beneath them. What they found were scattered holdouts, planetary militia, a few PDF stragglers, and a handful of unarmed civilians clinging to ruin and memory. There was no organized resistance left. The massacre began without an order. A cry went out over the Vox. Gunfire barked across the ruins. Civilians were herded into temple courtyards and machine halls, their hands lifted in surrender or prayer. The Carnadons moved through the streets with flamers and shotguns, treating each hovel like a strong point. And then Commisar Vel strode into the square. He was young, not green, not anymore. He'd served on Voltan Ridge and survived the ice tombs of Clariac. But he had not yet been tempered by the 88th, not yet broken. He believed his words still carried the Emperor's weight. He raised his voice, demanded a ceasefire. "These are not combatants," he shouted, his bolt pistol lowered but not holstered. "The slaughter is done. By his light, you will cease." For a moment, the gunfire stopped. Then someone in the ranks said, "He hesitates." That was all. The first shot hit the Commisar in the leg. He fell, crying out in surprise, not pain. He tried to stand. A second shot took out his knee. Bolt gun fire, precise and cold. He dropped the pistol. The Carnadons didn't shout. They didn't mutiny. There was no chant, no open rebellion. They simply walked past him. 24 guardsmen, armor still black with soot and memory, moved forward as one. A single soldier paused to pick up the Commissar's weapon, then dropped it into the burning remains of a prayer statue. Vel tried to crawl back toward his command chimera. That was when the flamers opened up. He screamed until the Vox feed shorted out from static. Later, the regiment commander, Colonel Magras, recorded the following entry in his after-action report. Enemy resistance neutralized. No friendly casualties of note. Commisar Vel KIA by crossfire incident. Body unrecoverable. No one challenged the account. The Munitorum filed the paperwork under standard attrition. But among the Carnadons, Vel's death was not a tragedy. It was a ritual. They buried him beneath a mound of skulls, enemy and otherwise. The pit was dug not with shovels, but with lascutter fire, a silent rite. No sermon, no prayer. The mound became known simply as the warning. Other commissars took notice. When they visited the 88th's forward operating bases, they were deferential. They wore thicker armor, said fewer words. Some stayed only long enough to record a formal presence before departing on phantom errands. One never returned at all. His transport exploded en route to HQ. The 88th didn't flinch. They simply carried on with their training exercises. The doctrine of the Carnadons changed after Vel. They no longer submitted reports directly to attached commissars. Instead, they drafted their own mission parameters: compliance through completion, victory through silence. Those phrases appeared in margin notes, then on field briefings, then as official headers on tactical doctrine. When questioned, Colonel Magras only said, "They know what to do." Among the troops, a new saying was carved into armor plates and helmet bands: no mercy, no fear, no masters. They had become a weapon without a leash. By the time word reached Segmentum Command, the story had twisted into myth. One version claimed Vel was a heretic purged righteously. Another said he was a coward, executed for treason mid-combat. A third, whispered in Munitorum drinking dens, claimed the 88th no longer recognized the commissariat at all. And yet, despite it all, the regiment was never censured. Why? Because they won. Every time. Every deployment. No matter how brutal, how obscene the aftermath, the results were the same. Pacification complete. Strategic assets reclaimed. Civilian resistance erased. Entire planets fell silent. And so, the Munitorum made a quiet, terrible decision to pretend it had never happened, to bury Vel in paperwork, deeper than any grave. No formal charges, no tribunal, no record, only a mound of skulls on a dead world. And the 88th marching on, loyal not to command, but to themselves. No mercy, no fear, no witnesses. The skies above Carson Prime never cleared. They hung with ash, blood mist, and the burned gases of extermination-grade bombardment. Even the orbitals had been blackened by the smoke of war. No sun pierced the grey, no wind stirred the smoke. It was as if the planet itself refused to exhale. And at the center of this silence marched the 88th Carnadon. This was the campaign that should have ended them. At least that's what the records once said, before those records were retracted, sterilized, or corrected. What follows here is based on a recovered report smuggled out of the Munitorum archives, a deathbed confession from a logistics scribe, and vox fragments unearthed during an inquisitorial purge. Together, they paint a picture not of a campaign, but of an atrocity. Because on Carson Prime, war ended, and what replaced it could only be called murder. The war began conventionally enough. Carson was a minor agri-world with a rebel infestation. PDF forces failed to contain the uprisings, and the planetary governor requested imperial intervention, standard procedure. The rebellion was widespread but disorganized, mostly disaffected militia, rogue psychers, and one or two minor heretical sects. There were no known Xenos, no traitor Astartes, no warp incursions, no excuses. The first wave of Astra Militarum failed. The second wave didn't make it past orbit. That's when Segmentum Command ordered the 88th Carnadon. They didn't arrive in troop carriers. They arrived in prison barges. The moment they landed, the air changed. Civilians who had previously tolerated the rebels began to flee their towns without explanation. Entire villages were abandoned within days of the 88th's arrival. Farmers took their own lives rather than speak to the commissariat. Families nailed their doors shut from the inside and lit their homes on fire. It wasn't fear of the rebels, it was fear of something worse. The first documented order issued by Colonel Thaddeus Cray of the 88th Carnadon was not an assault formation or deployment chart. It was a purge list. By the end of the first week, over 60% of Carson's local population had been evaluated as spiritually compromised. That was the phrase used, spiritually compromised. Not traitor, not heretic, not combatant. Spiritually compromised. The sin of being afraid, the sin of hesitation, the sin of silence. All of them were executed. No trials, no interrogations, no inquisitorial oversight. The 88th executed every last one with an efficiency normally reserved for servitors, and they kept the records. Not names, those were erased, but skulls, neatly piled, indexed, numbered by operation. An administratum aide who briefly worked with the 88th's quartermaster reported finding detailed statistical analysis comparing bullet usage per kill, corpse disposal times, and execution morale indexes among squads. One squad received a commendation for the most efficient use of lasgun power packs during a mass firing line. This wasn't war, it was something else, something colder. By week 3, the rebellion had ceased to exist as a meaningful military force. Most rebels had either surrendered or been routed into the highlands. Imperial command issued a pacification order. That's when the real killing began. Colonel Cray declared a full sector denial campaign. He ordered every food silo, water tank and livestock processing facility destroyed. When Munitorum logistics protested, Cray overrode them with a security order stamped for the eyes of the Emperor alone. What followed became a blueprint for sterilization. The 88th began systematically executing not just rebels, but anyone who might one day become one. Infants, pregnant women, elders with infirmities. Whole villages were burned, not because they resisted, but because they might one day harbor someone who would. And it wasn't done quickly. The Carnadons employed psychological destruction as a secondary weapon. They made the survivors watch. One village, Hanashet, was recorded via drone footage. Aerial footage shows the 88th erecting poles at regular intervals, stringing the corpses of those executed the day before along the paths leading into the settlement. Not a single body was burned or buried. Instead, they were left for the wild carrion to desecrate. By the time the 88th moved on, forests of execution poles lined Carson's countryside. Some were so tall they bent in the wind like mourning trees. Others were sharpened into stakes and impaled with dozens of corpses, children pressed between adults as if crushed in a final embrace. This was not strategic, this was art. And the artists wore flak armor and red inked aquillas. There's no official record of the sterilization orders, but we found it anyway. A recovered Vox transcript from a Medici transport captured a voice matching Colonel Cray's tone and cadence. It lasted 12 minutes. In it, he orders his senior officers to begin Operation Mercy Protocol. The name is ironic. Cray explains that the only way to ensure the stability of Carson's future is to permanently cleanse the genome. By morning, the 88th had begun chemical sterilization of the surviving population. It wasn't hidden, it was announced via loudspeaker. By the authority of the Emperor of mankind, you have been chosen for purification. Rejoice, you are no longer breeding stock for heresy. Your bodies shall be clean of rebellion. Your children shall never betray him. They gassed the water supplies. Medici tents offered free treatment, and inside, administered cocktails that rendered entire towns infertile. Those who resisted were executed publicly. The soldiers responsible received purity seals. There are no reports of any Imperial agents protesting. Only a single complaint was logged, and even that redacted by Munitorum scribes before it reached Terra. Its last words were, "The Grave Regiment has gone too far. There is no war here, only a performance, a ritual, a spectacle." They left forests behind them, not of trees, but of poles. Carson Prime today is a dead world. Officially, it's listed as an ecological failure due to post-combat degradation. Unofficially, it is forbidden to speak of what happened there. The name Carson is no longer included in segmentum cartography, despite its continued planetary orbit. But survivors still speak. Whispers echo across astropathic channels. Old priests refer to the Ghost Regiment, and in one remote shrine on a neighboring moon, a heretical fresco exists, showing a sky of skulls, a river of flame, and marching figures wearing the flak armor of the Astra Militarum, but with no faces, just blank masks and blood-soaked boots. The 88th Carnadon were never punished. There was no inquiry, no reprimand, no public censure. They were redeployed. Segmentum Command erased all records of civilian population before the purge. Without a baseline, no war crime could be proven, and without proof, there was no crime. When inquisitorial agents later attempted to investigate, they found every data spool corrupted, every cogitator wiped, and every Vox recording overwritten with static. Only the polls remained. Today, Carson Prime is known only by its grave name, Grave Regiment Sector, named not for the dead, but for the killers. Because the 88th left more than bodies in the dirt. They left something else. Something that crawls out of the ground when the wind is still. Something that marches without sound through the empty forests of poles. Something that speaks only in silence and answers prayers with the sound of a trigger. On Carson Prime, war was perfected, and war does not forget. There are orders, and then there are truths. In the case of the 88th Carnadon Regiment, the line between them blurred until nothing was left but blood. It happened on Atamazar, a black soil world whose name was scrubbed from records within a week of the final engagement. Not because the war ended in defeat, not because the enemy won, but because the victors acted with such ruthless precision and horror that even the Inquisition couldn't find the proper words to categorize it. Until that day, the 88th had been the Emperor's loyal attack dogs. After it, they became something else entirely. We uncovered fragments of the regimental Vox orders on that day. Most of the recordings were damaged. One transmission remained mostly intact. Target zone, civilian resistance pockets, orders, suppression only, no atomics, no orbital fire, ground sweep, stun and capture, re-education priority alpha, suppression only, no atomics. That was the key phrase. Because the 88th heard those words and did the opposite. According to surviving members of the attached Mechanicus logistics cohort, the orders were delivered through the proper secure channels. Confirmed, verified, sealed, the Lord Marshal's own sigil attached. And yet, when the sweep began, the Carnadon heavy units loaded up with plasma shells, trench burners, and seismic shatter mortars. When they landed, they painted the outer walls of the settlements with promethium gel and barbed wire, not to contain an enemy, but to trap them inside. What happened next was recorded by a forward recon Auspex drone piloted by the Adeptus Mechanicus. The footage was classified as Hereticus Maxima, which meant not even planetary governors could review it, but someone leaked it, someone who wanted the truth known. The drone footage showed what appeared to be a peaceful township, civilians clustered in streets, no weapons in sight, a few small protests breaking out, farmers, elderly, children. Then came the 88th, not in formation, not in disciplined ranks, but in staggered fire teams, masks on, helms blackened, regimental insignia scoured clean. No warnings were issued, no stun grenades, just fire. Whole buildings were collapsed with heavy stubber emplacements. Any crowd that gathered was sprayed with needler fire. The infirmary tent was targeted first, then the water reserves. The drone's feed jittered as electromagnetic pulses began to scramble its sensor core, but not before capturing the image of a Carnadon trooper, hoisting a child by the ankle, throwing them into a blaze with mechanical indifference. The final image before the footage burned out was a flag being hoisted, not the Imperial Aquila, not the Carnadon blood-red jack, but a pale banner made from stitched human skin flapping above a mound of screaming, burning people. The Inquisition sent a team. Inquisitor Militant Rixon Vor of the Ordo Hereticus arrived within hours, demanding to speak to the senior command echelon of the 88th. They found no one. The command Voxnet was silent. The officers' quarters were empty. In their place stood 5 lines of soldiers, unblinking, guns slung low, standing in knee-deep ash. No salute, no movement, just stillness. When Rixon Vor approached and asked why they disobeyed direct orders, a single Vox operator stepped forward. He spoke 6 words. The Emperor did not see this. The Inquisitor ordered an immediate purge. He declared them all contaminated, heretical, tainted by chaos. He demanded the loyalty oath be read aloud, and their weapons laid at his feet. They did neither. Instead, they raised their rifles, not in mutiny, not in rebellion, but in silence. And they waited. The Inquisitor's retinue opened fire. 12 of the 88th dropped. The rest did not move. They simply stood and bled. When the storm ended, Rixen Vor stood alone, looking at what he'd done. And then, for reasons no one has ever explained, he left. The next day, the Inquisition filed a report stating that the 88th suffered terminal morale collapse during cleansing operations and were deemed unsalvageable. No formal charges, no trial, no exterminatus, because no one wanted to explain what they'd seen. No one wanted to say that an entire regiment refused to kill on command, not because they were weak, but because the command itself was deemed beneath them. They didn't turn traitor. They turned executioner of the Imperium's own cruelty. And when it came time to pay the price, they didn't beg. They just stood and bled. We interviewed former guardsmen who served adjacent to the 88th during the Atamazar campaign. Most refused to speak. One gave us this. They weren't killing out of rage. They weren't confused. They looked through you, past you, like they were waiting to be stopped. But no one did. And that's the part that haunts me. No one did. Years later, the name Atamazar was quietly removed from navigational star charts. Not destroyed, just lost. The 88th weren't disbanded after that. They were reassigned to places with no oversight, to wars that no one wanted to admit existed, to purge zones where the Inquisition themselves were afraid to walk. Some say that was their punishment, others say it was a reward. Because after Atamazar, the 88th never spoke of orders again. They didn't need to. They became something older than obedience, older than faith. They became judgment. And when judgment comes in the form of a regiment trained to kill without mercy and without fear, there is no defense. They don't bury their dead. That was the first thing the medici officer noticed when she was deployed to Forward Operating Station Gloriana. It had no cemetery, no trenches for the fallen, not even a chapel with a plaque of remembrance. When she asked where the graves were, the sergeant of the 88th Carnadon looked at her, blinked once and said, "You're standing on them." The soil was black and soft, a little too soft. The station had been built atop years of composted human remains, unmarked, unceremonious, and rich with the ash of the fallen. The bones had long since crumbled. The only markers were the mounds of fungus that sprouted at night, glistening like pale organs in the starlight. Troopers avoided stepping on them, not out of respect, but superstition. That soil grew the only thing the 88th cared to cultivate: moss for camouflage, blood vines for cordage, and low-stalk crops that could survive a trench's stale breath. But graves, there were none, because in the 88th, the living walk over the dead every day. There were rumors, of course, that in the early days, the 88th did bury their dead, that they held ceremonies, lit incense, burned cards etched with the Emperor's blessing. But it didn't last. One Commisar, drunk on mourning, tried to order a proper burial detail after a heavy engagement. The detail never returned. They found him the next morning, impaled on a stacked cairn of las rifles, eyes open, lips stitched shut with his own prayer beads. The message was clear. Grief had no place here. From that day on, no burials, no rites, no eulogies. The chaplains of the 88th do not preach. They do not stand atop wreckage, calling for imperial glory or vengeance in the name of terror. Instead, they walk silently, trailing sensor chains behind them, their robes lined with data cables, their mouths covered in rebreathers that hiss in sacred binary. It is said that if you slow down the Vox recordings of their patrols, their steps form patterns, mathematically structured sermons, encoded into footfall. Some say the ground remembers, others say it suffers. One chaplain, designated Interlocutor 88. Herald was recorded pacing across a battlefield for 6 hours after an engagement. No words, no gestures, just a perfect spiral, his boots tapping against skulls, his chain sensor whirring with each breath. By the end of the recording, every servitor in the listening station had stopped functioning. They were later found kneeling. A logistics officer once attempted to recover dog tags from the battlefield. It was a reasonable order, identification of the fallen, cross-referencing with records, filing death tallies to Munitorum census archives. But when he brought his request to the 88th command tent, the response was a printed receipt. It listed the names of the fallen as composted, composted, composted. A second request brought a second receipt. This time, the names had been replaced with machine code, SCI characters, a few lines in High Gothic that translated roughly to "waste returned to the cycle." He tried a third time. That was the last request he ever filed. Weeks later, his body was found in the waste pits behind the station, stripped of insignia. There were no wounds, only dirt, under the nails, in the mouth, in the eyes, as if he had buried himself. The waste pits were never called graves, but that's what they were. Massive, square-cut pits behind every temporary forward operating site. Covered with grates, they smouldered slowly. The heat came not from flames, but from decomposition. Organic heat. Flesh, muscle, bone, all broken down and churned into nutrient slurry, sometimes mixed with battlefield biomass, sometimes stirred by automated cranes that dragged hooked arms through the mulch. When asked what the mixture was used for, a quartermaster replied, "Hydroponics, trencher feed, sometimes fuel." And when pressed about what went into the mix, she smiled and said, "Whatever's left." What happened to the dead of the 88th? They were recycled. That was the word they used, recycled. Their flak armor stripped and refitted, their rations reprocessed into protein bricks. Even their final words, if recorded, were converted into data matter and embedded into the next generation of vox beads, as if to ensure their deaths whispered forever. There was no ceremony because there was no finality, no mourning because there was no time. They walked over bones, ate from the same fields fertilized by fallen comrades, drank recycled runoff. The dead fed the living became the dead. There was no difference, no boundary, only the cycle. There were no statues to heroes in the 88th, no plaques, no books of remembrance. Only one monument existed, and it was hidden. A square room buried 20 meters beneath Command Bunker Delta 4 on the planet Escalon 4. Inside the room was a single chair made of polished bone. No one was allowed to sit on it. The lights were always dimmed. The walls were lined with slabs of ceramite engraved in machine code, each a name, each a casualty. There were thousands. No one visited the room except one man, a blind astropath who entered once a year and sat on the floor beside the bone chair. He never spoke, only listened. It is said the walls hummed for hours afterward. The 88th developed a superstition early in their campaign. If you remembered the dead too long, you joined them. They called it the recall curse. A junior lieutenant once attempted to deliver a field sermon honoring 6 fallen troopers. He spoke their names. He cried. He tried to humanize their sacrifice. By the next week, his whole squad was dead. Not in combat, not to enemy fire, but accidents, a trench collapse, a misfired last pack, a chemical leak, all statistically improbable. After that, the rest of the regiment stopped speaking names altogether. They referred to the dead as voided, voided in service, voided and recycled. Never killed, never lost, certainly not remembered. In one recovered Vox intercept, a trooper is heard dragging a body back from the field. He's breathing heavily. The wind howls in the background. The voice on the other end asks for an identification tag. The trooper responds, "Already in the pit." The voice protests, says they need the name. The trooper says, "Names rot." Then there's silence, then static, then, faintly, something else. A second voice, in the same tone, the same cadence. But the trooper had already died the day before. The 88th believed in function, not form. Death was not a sacred passage. It was resource transfer. They joked about it. "They're feeding the trenches now," they'd say after someone fell, or "we'll see them in the next harvest." But it wasn't just gallows humor, it was philosophy, a belief that once you died, you served better as soil, as fuel, as mass, and if the Emperor's light shone truly, then nothing was ever wasted, not even the soul. Some say the 88th's refusal to bury the dead wasn't callousness. It was fear, that if they stopped to dig, the enemy would catch up, that if they lowered their heads in prayer, they'd be cut off, that if they allowed themselves the softness of grief, they'd drown in it. So they kept moving, marched over corpses, fired from behind makeshift walls of bodies, used limbs to reinforce barricades. One notorious siege saw the 88th form a makeshift levee with their own fallen, stacked high enough to block incoming mortars. When the Inquisitor assigned to the sector asked who gave the order, the reply came back unsigned, written in blood on a scrap of ration paper. No one gave the order, the dead volunteered. There was one exception to their rule, one corpse they never composted, Commisar Halvik Ornos. He had tried to stop a massacre, an entire village, unarmed, suspected only of housing heretical texts. Halvik stood in the square, arms wide, refusing to let the 88th fire. He cited doctrine, he ordered compliance. The regiment shot him first, then the villagers. Halvik's body was left in the open for 3 days. On the 4th, he was buried, not under soil, but under a mound of skulls. His own men collected them from a nearby charnel pit, cleaned them, stacked them around his corpse like a throne, then left. When Munitorum auditors arrived weeks later, there was no record of his death, no bullet reports, no sanctioned burial, just a notation. Commisar reassigned to biomass. The 88th didn't bury their dead, but they never truly let them go either. They carried pieces, fingers worn on cords as keepsakes, teeth braided into lanyards, scars inked with the serial numbers of fallen brothers. Every laspack charged with residue pulled from recycled bone, every meal flavored with recycled protein. They ate memory, breathed ash, drank legacy, and in the end, they became the same thing they stepped on, a regiment of the dead, walking, not because they had no fear, but because they had forgotten what life was for. They were meant to be routine reconnaissance logs. That's how it always starts, mundane, procedural, unremarkable. Nothing more than a standard Vox channel record, filed under Sector 88 Krieg Subcommand, encrypted under low-priority cipher, and dumped into the Munitorum's archival overflow like a million others, until someone noticed the timestamp. The first Vox message came 6 hours after the team was officially listed as inactive due to presumed annihilation, which would have been a paperwork anomaly, except for the second message. The one that began with a full Vox chant in Hex Dialect 2, a dialect banned by the Ecclesiarchy after the Wormbreaker heresies. A dialect none of the 5 recon troopers were ever trained to know. We acquired these logs through unofficial channels. What follows is a partial transcript, manually reconstructed. The original was corrupted, fragmentary, and embedded with low-frequency subharmonics that caused auditory hallucinations in 3 separate Munitorum adepts. This account has been cleared for limited release, though no one will claim authorship. We suggest you don't listen alone. This is Recon Team Valor 3, recording live from Eastern Trench Line off grid 63 Sigma. Visibility is under 10 meters. Fog is moving in again. Static on the VoxNet is heavy but readable. No enemy contact for the last 90 minutes. We're holding in Overwatch until the 88th advance clears. End log. Standard recon intro. Calm, clipped, professional. The kind of tone every guardsman learns to fake. This was Corporal Juno Halux. 27 confirmed operations, served in 3 separate theaters. The kind of soldier who saw through the lies but kept walking. You can hear it in her voice, tight, restrained, too measured for a situation that's already gone wrong. Still no sign of the advance. The 88th passed us 3 hours ago. They were dragging artillery pieces manually, by rope. Never seen anything like it. They didn't acknowledge us. Helmets down, full blackout. One of them, Emperor, help me. He was whispering as he passed. Not to us, not to anyone. Just whispering to his own boots, repeating the same sentence. There's a long silence before she says it. The dead are lighter than the living. Over and over. The dead are lighter than the living. Another voice breaks in here, Private Morrow, the youngest of the team. Ma'am, I don't like this place. That line would become a meme in some darker corners of the data net. It was repeated mockingly by other units, until they listened to the next log. This is Sergeant Akir. Halux gone, we don't know how. No gunfire, no scream, just gone. She was 5 meters ahead. Then there was this pause. The fog pulsed. That's the only way I can describe it, like it breathed. Then she was gone. No tracks, no blood, just her helmet turned upside down. We're falling back to rally point Gamma 6. There's something wrong with the 88th. We passed a second unit, no insignia, no unit tags, but wearing our armor. Old model flak plate, but with fresh kill marks carved into the chest plates. They didn't even look at us, just kept marching. All of them had broken Vox units strapped to their backs. Akir begins to whisper then, not out of fear, not panic, reverence. I think they're listening through the broken ones. There's a rustle, then silence, then something faint in the background. A chant, unintelligible, not in Gothic, not in any known dialect. This one is corrupted, but we recovered partial fragments via Vox reconstruction. Don't look directly at them. We saw her face in his helmet. They don't blink, they don't blink. And then suddenly, all 4 voices in perfect unison. The Emperor does not require eyes. This line repeats 4 times. This one is a clear chant, not speech, a low-frequency Vox mantra. The voices are distorted, deepened, almost inhuman. Audio analysts ran modulation checks. None of the frequencies align with human laryngeal range. It is as though the speakers' throats were reshaped. This should not be possible. The chant is transcribed as follows. From bone, from soil, from ash, we rise. From order, from creed, from flesh, we fall. The meat is the medium. The message is eternal. The 88th remembers. At this point, Recon Command flagged the channel as compromised and sent a kill code to disable remote Vox broadcast. It failed. Instead, a return signal was broadcast back up the line. No one ordered it. Sergeant Akir again. His voice is different now. Slower, more rhythmic. You can hear the wet rasp behind each word. I understand now. The fog isn't natural. It's part of them. Or they're part of it. It muffles time. We've been here longer than 4 hours. I think it's been days, weeks, maybe longer. My beard is longer. My hands are older. I saw my own corpse in the mud. It smiled. There's laughter in the background, not deranged, joyful. They showed us the other war, the one beneath the war, where there are no orders, just purpose and silence. This log ends with a phrase that has since been flagged by the Ordo Hereticus. The flesh is redundant, the Vox is the new soul. Private Morrow's voice, hollow, flat. We've joined the advance. The ones with no faces. They showed me how to hollow it out. Took hours, but now I'm clean. I can receive better. There is a pause, then a wet sound, flesh against metal, scraping. My mouth is where the message lives now. Then silence. Then the sound of something crawling into the microphone. Only one voice. The identity is disputed. Audio specialists believe it's an amalgam, multiple speakers layered into one signal, stitched together by whatever corrupted the transmission. This is not a warning, this is an invitation. We are not the 88th. We are what remains when all else is burned away. We are the purpose. We are the silence between orders. We are the message that keeps repeating when no one is left to hear it. We are war unbound by mercy. And you've heard us now. The log ends with coordinates. They lead to a battlefield already glassed by orbital bombardment. No survivors, number 88th, no remains. Just one broken Voxcaster, still hissing the final phrase, no mercy, no fear. The recovered recordings were submitted to the Segmentum Command for evaluation. Within 72 hours, a secondary inquisitorial audit team quarantined the entire data silo. 3 scribes were executed for transcription without sanction. One Vox adept drilled his own ears out with a cogitator stylus after hearing the 5th log. When Medici staff revived him, he screamed a single sentence for 47 minutes straight. "We are all on the same frequency. We don't know what happened to Recon Team Valor 3. Official records now list their unit as reassigned, but no one's seen them since." Then again, sometimes when another guardsman unit is assigned to the same sector, when the fog is thick and the orders are unclear, they report something strange in the distance. A figure in old armor, carrying a Vox unit, smiling. There are 3 known dates when the 88th Carnadon were officially declared annihilated. Not missing, not routed, not scattered, annihilated. The first time was on Varelia 9th. The Munitorum lists show a death toll exceeding 26,000 guardsmen. No survivors. The 88th had been defending a Spire city under siege from an Orc Wah. Vox logs ceased transmission during a planetary-wide storm, and satellite imaging captured only a towering inferno where the bastion once stood. An orbital strike was ordered to sterilize the ground. The Adeptus Administratum issued a commendation, posthumous. 3 standard years later, the 88th were sighted on Fathman's Gate. Same name, same banners. But something was wrong. Their war gear was different. Older patterns, mix-matched plates, scavenged relics. Some of their bolt guns bore pre-heresy forge marks. Their officers wore helms etched with devotional runes in dialects that hadn't been spoken in the segmentum in 6,000 years. They fought like the 88th. They died like them, but no one saw them eat. No one saw them rest. At night they stood, rank and file, unmoving. A fresh regiment was sent to liaise with them during the pacification of the southern hive belts. That regiment disappeared. When another force arrived, the 88th were already gone. Only their sigil remained, burned into the walls of the PDF command center. No bodies, no blood, just that symbol. A stylized skull, weeping oil. The second time they were wiped out, it was on Dolthus Reach. A Tyrannid splinter fleet had landed with such mass that even orbital support couldn't slow the biomass tide. The 88th were deployed with 3 other regiments. All 3 sister regiments were lost. Again, the 88th were declared annihilated. The Inquisition arrived 6 months later. Dolthus Reach was cleansed with cyclonic torpedoes. No sign of the 88th was ever found. Until 17 years later, when they appeared on the ice moons of Ryvarn. Same name, same banners, but their uniforms were wrapped in carapace, not armor. Insectoid plates fused into their flak vests. Some claimed the plates still twitched. A Medicae noticed that several soldiers were missing hearts, but were somehow still alive. The third and final death of the 88th came during the siege of Pelax. By that point, the Departamento Munitorum had stopped assigning them to joint operations. They fought alone. The siege was a disaster. 75,000 enemy mutants broke through the orbital barricade. The 88th held the lower tiers of the hive for 11 days. No resupply, no air support. On the 12th day, the hive collapsed inward. Survivors reported seeing members of the 88th crushed beneath the rubble, torn apart by collapsing ceramite, swallowed by the flame. It was the last battle the Munitorum officially recorded for the 88th Carnadon. Their regimental code was archived, papers stamped, colors folded. They were buried again, not under rock this time, but in bureaucracy. But 1 year later, they resurfaced on the world of Carrion V. By then, nothing made sense. They were listed as a new formation, 88th Carrion Carnadons, but they carried medals from previous campaigns. One sergeant bore the litanies of Varelia 9 across his chest plate. Another wielded a chainsword etched with the dates of the siege of Pelax. Impossible. Dead men fighting living wars. A tech priest who examined their Vox array went mad. He claimed their signals were transmitting backward in time. They fought the Carrion uprising with savagery. Even the Inquisition hesitated to sanction. Civilians were used as body armor. Children were pressed into service and detonated. One village was wiped out with neurotox gas, not because they resisted, but because they sang songs not in High Gothic. The Inquisition attempted to send an observer. That observer vanished before even reaching the surface. The 88th left no explanation, only a field of neatly aligned bones. Human, cleaned, they should not exist, and yet they do. There are theories. Some say they are cloning themselves. The original 88th, the one from Virelia 9, may have established some secret gene bank, replicating their bodies to fight on endlessly. But that doesn't explain the changes. Why some of them are taller now? Why some breathe vacuum? Why some don't breathe at all? Others suggest they've become possessed, not by demons, no warp taint is detected, but something older, something embedded in the DNA of war itself. Some Imperial scholars call it the curse of unyielding purpose. Others refuse to give it a name. What is known is this: where the 88th marches, death follows, no matter the cost, no matter the target. On Charnov Minor, a single picked capture shows something terrifying. It depicts a regiment of the 88th fully assembled, but the faces beneath the helmets are blank. Skin only, no features, no eyes, no mouths. The image was dismissed as a data glitch until the officer who dismissed it was found dead, his face removed. Not cut, wiped clean. By M42, whispers across the segmentum obscurus speak of the Grave Regiment. No one calls them the 88th anymore. They arrive where the fighting is thickest. They don't request supplies. They don't retreat. They don't speak. Sometimes they wear their old insignia. Sometimes they wear the symbols of enemy factions sewn into their coats. One report claimed they marched under the banner of the Death Corps of Krieg, only to find that Krieg had no record of any such deployment. They are always where they should not be. They fight in battles long since lost. They reinforce lines already overrun. In one haunting incident, the 88th were seen charging into a war zone already engulfed by exterminatus. Not away, into. Witnesses watched them burn. But later, Vox signals from the ruins picked up the same regimental codes, still transmitting. The Munitorum no longer assigns them, but they still receive orders. From where? No one knows. One theory posits a long-dead Lord Commander, whose final orders were broadcast on a loop, corrupted by time and static. The 88th, it seems, are still obeying, still listening, even if the rest of the galaxy has moved on. A Vox operator once tuned into their frequency. She said it sounded like a man screaming underwater. She retired the next day. Her report was redacted. Even her name was struck from records. In the ruins of Threxus 6, scrawled in blood on a hab wall. They bury themselves in our dead and come out wearing their skin. One inquisitorial observer offered a final theory. They are no longer a regiment, he wrote. They are a ritual of violence, a rite of total war, the kind of death that forgets it ever had a beginning. When you summon them, you do not summon men, you summon memory, pain sharpened into doctrine. One guardsman who survived fighting beside them said this: they marched into the storm and came out of it wearing its bones. Another said, they never sleep because they're afraid the dream will end. But perhaps the most chilling comment comes from a child, the only survivor of a city bombed by the 88th. When asked what she saw, she whispered, they smiled without lips, they talked like the ground. The 88th Carnadon, the Grave Regiment, the men who will not die, the orders that never end, they are a testament to what happens when war forgets to stop, when loyalty outlives identity, when flesh becomes fuel, when names are just echoes inside helmets no longer worn by men. They fight. They always fight. And in that fighting, something else begins to speak through them, and it is not human. There are 3 known dates when the 88th Carnadon were officially declared annihilated, not missing, not routed, not scattered, annihilated. The first time was on Virelia 9th. The Munitorum lists show a death toll exceeding 26,000 guardsmen. No survivors. The 88th had been defending a spire city under siege from an orc war. Vox logs ceased transmission during a planetary-wide storm, and satellite imaging captured only a towering inferno where the bastion once stood. An orbital strike was ordered to sterilize the ground. The Adeptus Administratum issued a commendation, posthumous. 3 standard years later, the 88th were sighted on Fathman's Gate. Same name, same banners. But something was wrong. Their war gear was different. Older patterns, mix-matched plates, scavenged relics. Some of their bolt guns bore pre-heresy forge marks. Their officers wore helms etched with devotional runes in dialects that hadn't been spoken in the segmentum in 6,000 years. They fought like the 88th. They died like them, but no one saw them eat. No one saw them rest. At night they stood, rank and file, unmoving. A fresh regiment was sent to liaise with them during the pacification of the southern hive belts. That regiment disappeared. When another force arrived, the 88th were already gone. Only their sigil remained, burned into the walls of the PDF command center. No bodies, no blood, just that symbol, a stylized skull, weeping oil. The second time they were wiped out, it was on Dolthus Reach. A Tyrannid splinter fleet had landed with such mass that even orbital support couldn't slow the biomass tide. The 88th were deployed with 3 other regiments. All 3 sister regiments were lost. Again, the 88th were declared annihilated. The Inquisition arrived 6 months later. Dolthus Reach was cleansed with cyclonic torpedoes. No sign of the 88th was ever found. Until 17 years later, when they appeared on the ice moons of Ryvarn. Same name, same banners, but their uniforms were wrapped in carapace, not armor. Insectoid plates fused into their flak vests. Some claimed the plates still twitched. A medicae noticed that several soldiers were missing hearts, but were somehow still alive. The third and final death of the 88th came during the siege of Pelax. By that point, the Departamento Munitorum had stopped assigning them to joint operations. They fought alone. The siege was a disaster. 75,000 enemy mutants broke through the orbital barricade. The 88th held the lower tiers of the hive for 11 days. No resupply, no air support. On the 12th day, the hive collapsed inward. Survivors reported seeing members of the 88th crushed beneath the rubble, torn apart by collapsing ceramite, swallowed by the flame. It was the last battle the Munitorum officially recorded for the 88th Carnadon. Their regimental code was archived, papers stamped, colors folded. They were buried again, not under rock this time, but in bureaucracy. But 1 year later, they resurfaced on the world of Carrion V. By then, nothing made sense. They were listed as a new formation, 88th Carrion Carnadons, but they carried medals from previous campaigns. One sergeant bore the litanies of Virelia 9 across his chest plate. Another wielded a chainsword etched with the dates of the siege of Pelax. Impossible. Dead men fighting living wars. A tech priest who examined their Vox array went mad. He claimed their signals were transmitting backward in time. They fought the Carrion uprising with savagery even the Inquisition hesitated to sanction. Civilians were used as body armor. Children were pressed into service and detonated. One village was wiped out with neurotox gas, not because they resisted, but because they sang songs not in High Gothic. The Inquisition attempted to send an observer. That observer vanished before even reaching the surface. The 88th left no explanation, only a field of neatly aligned bones. Human, cleaned, they should not exist, and yet they do. There are theories. Some say they are cloning themselves. The original 88th, the one from Virelia 9, may have established some secret gene bank, replicating their bodies to fight on endlessly. But that doesn't explain the changes. Why some of them are taller now. Why some breathe vacuum. Why some don't breathe at all. Others suggest they've become possessed. Not by demons, no warp taint is detected, but something older. something embedded in the DNA of war itself. Some imperial scholars call it the curse of unyielding purpose. Others refuse to give it a name. What is known is this: where the 88th marches, death follows, no matter the cost, no matter the target. On Charnov Minor, a single picked capture shows something terrifying. It depicts a regiment of the 88th fully assembled, but the faces beneath the helmets are blank. Skin only, no features, no eyes, no mouths. The image was dismissed as a data glitch until the officer who dismissed it was found dead, his face removed. Not cut, wiped clean. By M42, whispers across the segmentum obscurus speak of the Grave Regiment. No one calls them the 88th anymore. They arrive where the fighting is thickest. They don't request supplies. They don't retreat. They don't speak. Sometimes they wear their old insignia. Sometimes they wear the symbols of enemy factions sewn into their coats. One report claimed they marched under the banner of the Death Corps of Krieg, only to find that Krieg had no record of any such deployment. They are always where they should not be. They fight in battles long since lost. They reinforce lines already overrun. In one haunting incident, the 88th were seen charging into a war zone already engulfed by exterminatus. Not away, into. Witnesses watched them burn. But later, Vox signals from the ruins picked up the same regimental codes, still transmitting. The Munitorum no longer assigns them, but they still receive orders. From where? No one knows. One theory posits a long-dead Lord Commander whose final orders were broadcast on a loop, corrupted by time and static. The 88th, it seems, are still obeying, still listening, even if the rest of the galaxy has moved on. A Vox operator once tuned into their frequency. She said it sounded like a man screaming underwater. She retired the next day. Her report was redacted. Even her name was struck from records. In the ruins of Threxus 6, scrawled in blood on a hab wall. They bury themselves in our dead and come out wearing their skin. One inquisitorial observer offered a final theory. They are no longer a regiment, he wrote. They are a ritual of violence, a rite of total war, the kind of death that forgets it ever had a beginning. When you summon them, you do not summon men, you summon memory, pain sharpened into doctrine. One guardsman who survived fighting beside them said this: they marched into the storm and came out of it wearing its bones. Another said, they never sleep because they're afraid the dream will end. But perhaps the most chilling comment comes from a child, the only survivor of a city bombed by the 88th. When asked what she saw, she whispered, they smiled without lips, they talked like the ground. The 88th Carnadon, the Grave Regiment, the men who will not die, the orders that never end, they are a testament to what happens when war forgets to stop, when loyalty outlives identity, when flesh becomes fuel, when names are just echoes inside helmets no longer worn by men. They fight. They always fight. And in that fighting, something else begins to speak through them. And it is not human,